Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unpacking the Faith. And today we're going to talk about a topic that you'll probably hear come up if you haven't heard it come up already. And that is whether or not Easter is connected to paganism. You'll hear similar claims made about other Christian holidays and feast days like Christmas and All Hallows Eve or Halloween, where people try to say that these days, these feast days, come from pagan origins. And so today we're going to take a very brief look at Easter. Now, it's important to remember most of the arguments that people will make and most of the evidence that they'll use for their arguments is based in things like similarities and coincidences. So a lot of the evidence is going to be superficial in nature, surface level. They'll say things like, this Christian feast day looks like this pagan day, or this Christian holiday happens at the same time as this pagan feast day. But those aren't good sources or pieces of evidence to use to show that Christian holidays and feast days came from paganism. Similarities does not equal causation or even connection. A good example of this in real life is the Titanic. The Titanic was a real ship that really sank in real life on its maiden voyage after hitting an iceberg. But prior to the sinking of the Titanic, there was a book released called The Wreck of the Titan. And it was about a ship called the Titan, which also sank on its maiden voyage. And a lot of the details about the Titan in that book are eerily similar to the sinking of the Titanic. Now, does that mean that the Titanic story was just made up and it was based off of this Titan story? No. There are eerie similarities between the two, but the two things are not related to each other and they're not connected. Things can be similar and have no connection and no relation. So one of the first things that people will bring up about Easter is similarity, and they'll try to use this as evidence that Easter came from paganism. And this is the actual word Easter. They will make the claim that Easter comes from pagan words such as Ishtar or Ostara. But we just don't really have the historical evidence to support that. Scholars will actually tell you we don't know where the word Easter came from. People have their ideas and their theories, but we just don't know where the word Easter came from. And as far as Ostara, we actually don't know if anyone actually worshipped Ostara. The only real reference we have to Ostara comes from the 8th century figure, Saint Bede. Outside of that, we don't have anyone in Christianity or paganism mentioning the worship of Ostara. So historians aren't even sure if anyone actually worshipped this deity. And many scholars think that Saint Bede may have been mistaken, confusing Ostara with some other pagan deity. But the bottom line is we don't have any evidence connecting the word Easter to Ostara or Ishtar or any of these other pagan deities other than the fact that the words sound alike. And that's not a real good reason to say that Easter came from that. And a lot of people will even correct you if you say Happy Easter to them. They'll correct you and say Happy Resurrection Sunday because their thinking is that Easter is of pagan origin, even though they've probably never actually fact-checked it to see if this is true. But if someone does that to you, you can point out to them that there is no real historical evidence connecting Easter to any of these pagan celebration days or pagan deities. You could even point out that the word Sunday has some connection to pagan origin. So if that's the reason you're correcting me for saying Easter, that's really not helping the situation. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you call it Easter or Resurrection Sunday, as long as you are worshiping Jesus and recognizing the day for what it is, the day that Jesus was raised from the dead. And in fact, the earliest Christians referred to Easter as Pascha in reference to Passover. Another thing that you'll sometimes hear people say is that it's kind of funny that Easter is celebrated in the springtime at the same time that these pagan deities of fertility were celebrated. But it's really not that funny and really not that strange that these two separate celebrations would happen at the same time, both Easter and the celebration of these pagan fertility deities. There's a perfectly logical explanation for this. During the springtime, a lot of things are coming back to life and becoming fertile. Animals are coming back out of hibernation. The grass is turning green. Flowers are blooming. You see signs of fertility. This would be a very reasonable time for pagans to celebrate their fertility deities. But is that why Christians celebrate Easter at the same time? No. Anyone who knows church history and Jewish history knows that the reason Christians celebrate Easter during this time of the year, during the March and April season, is because this is when the Jewish Passover is. And why is that important? Well, Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead during the Passover season. Those same people who ask you that, you should ask them, isn't it kind of funny that Easter and Passover seem to always line up with each other and come together? Well, the reason for this is because this is when Jesus was crucified and raised. This is why Easter is in the springtime, because this is when Passover is. Hence, the earliest Christians referring to Easter as Pascha in reference to Passover. So just because these two things happen at the same time, Easter and the celebration of these pagan deities, that does not mean that they're remotely related to each other. Remember, Titanic and the Titan. There are similarities, but that does not equal causation. And there's a very logical explanation for why Christians celebrate Easter in the spring and why the pagans would celebrate their fertility deities in the spring. They're not related to each other. Okay? So, the name Easter, we don't have evidence connecting it to pagan origin. The time of the year that Easter is celebrated, we don't have any evidence connecting that to pagan origin. What about things like Easter eggs and Easter bunnies? Well, we don't exactly know how all of these traditions came into Easter, and it's quite possible that early pagans used bunnies and eggs in their worship, but we're not really sure. So, to just say that Easter took the bunnies and the eggs from pagan worship, that's a stretch. We don't have any evidence that Easter got the eggs or bunnies from paganism. And there are other theories for or explanations as to why bunnies and eggs came in. Things like the earliest Christians were not allowed to eat eggs during Lent. So these eggs were stored up. And then when Lent was over, during Easter, people began to eat these eggs. But there's no evidence, none, connecting the Easter bunny or Easter eggs to paganism. Even if we did see that these pagans did use eggs and bunnies in their worship, that still doesn't show that Easter got eggs and bunnies from paganism. Remember, similarity does not equal connection or causality. So the bottom line is we don't have any real evidence, any evidence that a historian would use to come to a conclusion that would connect Easter, the time of the year that we celebrate it, the name, the celebration of Easter eggs, the use of Easter eggs and the use of Easter bunnies. We don't have any real evidence connecting these to paganism. So when people try to come to you and say that Easter is of pagan origin and they point out these things, challenge them. Ask them to show you that these things actually come from paganism. Not that there's similarities, but that these things come from paganism. And you will probably find that they're not able to do that. So, this Easter, celebrate Pascha or Easter or Resurrection Sunday with your family or whoever you celebrate it with confidence, knowing that you are not celebrating a pagan day or a pagan holiday. Enjoy your Easter eggs, eat your chocolate rabbits, Call it Easter, call it whatever you want to call it. It's fine as long as you're recognizing the day for what it is and that you continue to worship Jesus on this day. So hopefully if you are worried about that, I cleared some of those things up for you. Again, this is Ike Dawson. This is Unpacking the Faith, and I will see you next time.